believe in miracles!
You probably wouldn't know this by simply scrolling through this YouTube channel, considering all of the Halloween videos I've made in the past, and all the Halloween videos I am still making to this very day. But Halloween is not actually my favorite horror franchise. It's actually Friday the 13th. And with that said, I would like to discuss the forthcoming Friday the 13th TV series. Not the forthcoming feature film that has apparently been announced, but the TV show exclusively. And specifically, my biggest issue with the TV show regarding a certain casting choice. Now, as most of you watching this video are already aware, Adriana King will be returning to the Friday the 13th franchise in this upcoming TV show, and that's not speculation or rumor or hunch. That's a confirmed casting decision, and it's sort of a weird one to say the least. Not because I don't like the actress, not because I don't enjoy the character of Alice, but because of the fact that Alice fucking dies in Friday the 13th Part 2. Pretty damn significantly at that. Hence, her surprise casting in the TV show can only mean one of three things. Number one, she's playing Alice and her death was somehow reversed, like somehow she survived the injury and faked her own death thereafter. Number two, she's playing Alice and the events of Part 2 never happened, only keeping the events of the original film canon and disregarding Part 2 onward. Or number three, she's playing an entirely new character that has nothing to do with Alice whatsoever. If she's playing a new character, then fine. That fixes any issue I may have had with the casting decision, because it would completely avoid any continuity issues in that regard. But if either one of the first two options out of the three I mentioned earlier are what the showrunners choose to run with, we will have some serious Friday the 13th continuity questions on our hands. As if we already don't have enough of those, right? I want to take you through the realities of options 1 and 2, and see what kind of issues either option would raise within the franchise as a whole, if Adriana King is in fact reprising the role of Alice. And keep in mind, these issues aren't solely centered around the character of Alice herself, but a slew of other things, possibilities, and plot beats within the franchise that would become confusing, infuriating, and downright weird if the character of Alice either survived the events of Part 2, or if those events never happened in the first place. Let's dive in. Option 1. She's playing Alice, the events of Part 2 onward still happen, but she survives her supposed on-screen death, and returns much later down the road for the events of the TV show. Now, is it possible that Alice survived the head wound from Part 2? Sure it is. These are, after all, movies, works of fiction. A writer can undo anything he or she wants to, as long as the suspension of disbelief remains intact. And again, this is up to the writing, because if the writing is believable and convincing enough, or if it's at least interesting enough to make the audience sort of forget about critical thinking and what a real-life flesh wound like that would do to a human brain, you can pretty much keep the audience in tow with whatever it is you're trying to do, which in this case is making a direct puncture wound to the temple from an ice pick survivable. But let's say she did survive for the sake of this possible story option. Jason puts the ice pick in her head, she's dead, she survives somehow, she ends up at the hospital, she eventually heals up, and at some point in time she goes about her life. Great. We've seen stuff like this happen in works of fiction before. That's not the biggest issue here. The biggest issue here is the finer details of the broader situation. First of all, we hear the cast in Part 2 talking about how Alice disappeared prior to the main events of Part 2. So if Alice survived this attack, you would think that it would not only be big news, at least locally, but that there would be no weird disappearance nonsense mentioned at all, right? So for the sake of argument, let's say her supposed disappearance was due to her wanting to fake her own death in order to stop any future possible attacks. I mean, there's no reason to let everybody know she survived, right? She was already mentally drained, her life was in shambles, and she was attacked with a goddamn ice pick? Why wouldn't you fake your own death after that point? That could theoretically make sense as an explainable plot thread within the forthcoming TV show. It would keep the supposed death scene in Alice's apartment intact, the word on the street about her disappearing would remain intact, hence being talked about among local kids, as seen in Part 2, and her return in the TV show could not only be justified, but could almost seem plausible. But wait, there's one more big issue here, something that sort of throws a wrench in this whole scheme. We fucking see Alice's corpse in Jason's shack in Part 2, ice pick in head and everything. That's why she disappeared, because he took her fucking body back to Crystal Lake. How the hell do we explain this away? The only thing that can make this still work, and this is another long shot, is we simply don't acknowledge the corpse seen in Part 2 as belonging to Alice. I'm pretty sure no one in the movie ever explicitly says, that's the body of Alice. Therefore, if we really wanted to, we could pass it off as just another random corpse that just happens to have been killed in the same way. Is it a stretch? Yes. But if Alice is alive in this TV show as Alice, and the events of Part 2 still happened, then this is the only way. Now we move on to option 2, which I actually find to be even more infuriating than option 1, raising far too many questions and creating tons of continuity debacles within the franchise that will be debated among Friday the 13th fans until the end of time. So, option 2, let's take a look. Option 2. Alice returns to the franchise after surviving the events of Part 1, and the events of Part 2 simply never happen. Okay, great. Easy fix. Just retcon her death entirely by deleting the events of Part 2 onward, and just keeping the events of Part 1 in canon and proceeding from there. But we already know that the showrunners are probably going to be showcasing Jason Voorhees, as we know and love him, fully grown, possibly undead, and presumably in hockey mask in the show. So how the hell can they possibly retcon the events of Part 2 onward and still have Jason end up in the same hockey mask, and so on and so forth? I'll tell you how. They can't. Now, even if they were to say that only the events of Part 2 didn't happen, but Part 3 onwards did, how in the hell would that work? Not only do the events of Part 2 lead directly into Part 3, but the events of Part 3 lead directly into Part 4, all because of what happens in Part 2 regarding Jason. Are you just going to retcon bits and pieces of one movie, but leave other bits and pieces in canon? What the actual hell kind of nonsense would that be? Also, the events of Part 2, including Alice's death, are literally mentioned on screen in other sequels. So yeah, you can't just erase Part 2 but leave the rest alone. And if you choose to erase Part 2 onward and just keep the original film, then how the fuck does Alice even play into the Jason legend in the first place? How would she even know or care about him? How in the hell would Jason have ended up even getting the hockey mask from Shelley during Part 3, having abandoned his sackhead mask from Part 2, if Part 2 doesn't happen? And these questions just go on and on and on. The questions just keep coming. It's ridiculous. Do you see where I'm going with this now? By including Alice in the first place, as cool of an idea as it may be, it renders the TV show immediately problematic. Again, just cast her as somebody else. Alice's sister, perhaps. I don't know. Not Alice. But if you cast her as somebody else, that instantly fixes all of these problems. But of course, they're not going to do that. She will be playing Alice, you can bet your ass. They'll fuck up the timeline even worse than it already is. And what's worse and what pisses me off the most is there's going to be a slew of Friday the 13th fans defending this narrative bullshit if they choose to muddy up the waters with these options. But never fear, friends, when there's a civil war brewing among a horror IP, you can guarantee that your best friend, your pal, Old Man Dirty Money TobattoVision, will be there to not only tell you how wrong you are, but to also stab you in the eye socket with my figurative pitchfork. And if there's one thing we have a lot of right now, ladies and gentlemen, is horror fandom civil wars. And you can bet your ass that with the casting choice of Adriana King for the new Friday the 13th TV show, there's definitely a civil war brewing in this motherfucking fandom right now. Guaranteed. Now, get the fuck out of my face. Please. So, I had an epiphany the other day about the Scream franchise. Or at least, what I like to think was an epiphany. Maybe you will think this is less of a big deal than I do, but today, we will be talking about the Scream franchise, and specifically, the cinematic masterpiece known as Scream 3. And even more specifically than that,
Roman Bridger.
But why talk about
Roman Bridger?
Clearly one of the worst characters to ever materialize from a Scream movie? Well, I'll tell you why.
What if
Roman Bridger
wasn't
Roman Bridger
at all?
And what I mean by that is this. What if
Roman Bridger
wasn't
Roman Bridger?
And what I mean by that is, what if
Roman Bridger
wasn't actually a real person within the Scream universe?
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Let me explain. As we all know, and if you don't know, then spoiler alert,
Roman Bridger
is the older half-brother of Sidney Prescott, who isn't revealed as such until the final act of Scream 3. For the majority of the film's runtime, we know
Roman Bridger
as just some filmmaker working on the newest Stab sequel. But by the time Sidney lays waste to this newest Ghostface killer, we learn that not only is
Roman Bridger
Sidney's brother, put up for adoption years prior and rejected by Maureen when he tried to reconnect with her at a later time, but we also learn that he's basically been the ultimate mastermind behind this entire situation, the entire time. The guy straight up tells Sidney that he convinced Billy Loomis to kill Maureen, to get himself a partner in crime, a la Stu Macher, and find someone to frame for the murder, a la Cotton Weary. That's all fine and dandy. I have a lot of problems myself with this whole plot thread and its attempt to sort of wrap things up in this perfect bow. It just made things messier if you ask me. But fine and dandy nonetheless. For the sake of this video, let's move on. So here we are, on the verge of Scream 6. For some reason, looking back at 5 Scream films full of Scream canon and different slashers and seemingly different motives, all encircling Sidney Prescott.
As it should be. Sidney is the most important character. You're a fucking moron if you think otherwise.
But within that mix, you have this weird trilogy-capping storyline that only really connects Scream 1 and Scream 3 together, where again,
Roman Bridger
is this grandmaster murder planner guy that hires 2 high school lackeys to start a murder spree while wearing ghost costumes. This basically means that, according to Scream 3, without
Roman Bridger,
there would never be a string of Woodsboro murders, and there wouldn't be the succeeding events of Scream 2, 3, 4, 5, or soon to be 6. With a pen stroke and a few lines in a script,
Roman Bridger
instantly became the most important villain in the franchise. But what if that pen stroke was, in itself, a lie? What if that plot beat was its own misdirect in-universe? What if
Roman Bridger
wasn't even really
Roman Bridger
at all, just another killer placating an in-world script in order to further confuse and traumatize Sidney, possibly still working with somebody else, an unrevealed ghost face that has still never been revealed. And by the time he's killed off by Sidney in Scream 3, he was either so ingrained in the lore that he just couldn't believe his plan was crumbling before him, or he was just too injured to reveal the actual truth to her before he died. Or maybe a combination of both. Who knows? But this is what I was thinking about, circling back to the title of this video. We don't really know that
Roman Bridger
was
Roman Bridger.
We know what he told Sidney. We know what he took credit for. We know it kind of became the accepted truth in the Scream universe from that point forward in the story. But wouldn't it be insane if the next big Scream twist was that Roman was never actually Roman? he was never Sidney's brother, and he never actually had anything to do with orchestrating the events of the first film? Wouldn't that be crazy? That would be a total Scream twist too, and considering that Stu was originally supposed to be the mastermind killer in Scream 3 and not Roman, I think we could take any of the established canon as a giant franchise-spanning red herring for something much darker, much bolder, and much more devious in its plans. But who could it be? Who could have hired the
Roman Bridger
guy? Was Roman an actual director in Hollywood who got sucked into the secret mastermind's big plan? Or was John Hamilton involved and only made
Roman Bridger
a Hollywood name because he was aware of this master plan? Maybe it's John Milton himself behind everything. Maybe he didn't actually even die in Scream 3. If Stu Macher can survive a TV to the face and multiple stab wounds, John Milton could certainly fake a throat slash, especially considering him and Roman's background in horror movies and the special makeup effects that they have access to. Or could it still be Stu behind everything? Or both? Either way, Roman not actually being Roman would be a really cool twist, and it would completely change the dynamic of what we thought was true within the franchise, and would instantly remedy a lot of the franchise issues that I personally have. But what do I know? I just want to know what you think about this idea. Is it possible that Roman may never have been Roman in the first place? Is it possible that all of the hoopla surrounding the
Roman Bridger
Sidney being siblings, hiring Billy and Sue to kill Maureen Prescott, could all that stuff be one giant lie? Just something to fool the entire cast and the world of Scream into believing one thing, when in reality, none of it's true?
The fuck are you talking about?
Something to think about.
Shut the fuck up.
Love you, babe. Bye-bye. By the way, if you've yet to watch my video on Sidney Prescott's importance to the Scream franchise, and how wrong you are if you think the franchise should continue without her, click here to watch it now, or use the link in the description. I'm gonna say something to you, and just know that it's shocking, bewildering, and frightening all at the same time. We live in a world where the crow, wicked prayer, exists.
You stole the keys to Daddy's car, but you can't handle the horsepower.
This is the kind of shit that keeps me up at night. And I'm not just saying that because of how bad of a movie it is. I'm not just saying that because it's an outright disgrace to the first two entries in the franchise. I mean, it is. That's a given at this point. But the reason that the Crow Wicked Prayer, quote-unquote, keeps me up at night is because of its symbolic representation of how far and fast the Crow saga fell between the aforementioned first two films, Salvation, and of course, Wicked Prayer. With that said, I'm not somebody who outright despises the third film, Salvation. I mean, I've only seen it one time years and years and years ago when it first came out, and I thought it was okay at best. But compared to the first two films, Salvation, as decent of a film as it was already a huge dip in quality compared to the first film and City of Angels. And it was a huge indicator that this franchise would not be a theatrical property going forward after this. But when it comes to Wicked Prayer, this fucking movie takes the typical straight-to-video fall from grace that we've seen in a dozen other franchises and amps it up to 11. This movie could almost be considered a straight-up parody of the Crow franchise versus an actual sequel within the franchise, and I don't think that was the intention of the filmmakers. And I just want to point out that I'm trying really hard to not be mean here and just lay waste to the cast and crew members involved with the making of this film, because I'm sure they were trying their best to make something cool. And God knows I've made some truly fucking atrociously bad content in my years of indie filmmaking. So in that regard, I can't talk too much smack. But on the other hand, this is a professionally made film. This wasn't made by a ragtag team of underground indie filmmakers with zero budget. This was a professional team of filmmakers, actors, production companies behind them, etc. And we got this.
Man, I want to die. I want to die. Do it. Do it, please.
And this movie is not the fault of Edward Furlong. The dude can act. We've seen it time and time again. He was even one of the best parts of the Night of the Demons remake. And he's not even inherently bad in Wicked Prayer. In the scenes he's in, he's actually pretty good. But the parts that are bad are really bad. Not just bad, but awkward and cringy bad. But again, this isn't Edward Furlong's fault. This is more of the script's fault, and surely the direction he was given on set. Even the costume design to an extent. I mean, the costume design he has once he comes back from the dead and goes on his hunting spree, and makeup, it's really cringy looking. And so on and so forth. I mean, it's a bad script, bad costume choices, but Edward Furlong does what he can. I think he's doing his best here. But it does seem like he was instructed to try and act scary or something. That's what his scenes feel like to me. And it's just weird sometimes, you know?
Bruh.
With all that said, Furlong is definitely the best part of the movie, and probably the only reason the movie's actually watchable at all. Tara Reid and David Boreanaz and Dennis Hopper are obviously all in this movie too, but the less said about what they do in this movie, the better.
And to have and to hold your mortal badassitude. And he'll be your homie now and forevermore.
See what I mean? I mean, what the actual fuck? Again, as its own entity, The Crow Wicked Prayer is a roastable, cringe-worthy cheese fest that is as cringy and batshit insane as it is entertaining. But as a chapter in the bigger Crow franchise, the obvious signs of its serious drop in quality, especially compared to the previous films, even Part 3, is not only noticeable, but it really keeps you from ever investing yourself in the story. I mean, this movie is an abomination unto the human race. The remedy for this? I don't know. Maybe watch it enough times until you actually start to kind of like the movie? Sort of like what we did with Batman and Robin as a collective group. Everybody hated that fucking movie for like 20 years, right? But now, if you want a movie to put on at a party or a movie you can just sit down and roast, you put on Batman and Robin. It's at least a good time. It's funny in that regard.
Bruh.
That's a movie you can have a blast with. And if anything, I think The Crow Wicked Prayer can work in the same way. If you're having a party or a get-together or you want a movie just to sit down and laugh at, Wicked Prayer is probably a good bet. I think if nothing else, Wicked Prayer justifies its own existence in that regard. But anyways, I'm Brandon Tobatto of TobattoVision, and I am here to tell you that the very existence of The Crow Wicked Prayer is enough to keep me awake at night. Love you, babe. Bye now. When that first trailer for Scream V dropped, I remember making a video response video that I'll link in the comments below if you want to check it out, talking about how I hope Scream V isn't a blatant, direct, or intentional ripoff of our 2018 Ghostface fan film, which as of now, I think it's the second most viewed Scream fan film. I could be wrong. There was a newer one that came out last year that kind of blew ours out of the water. But as far as the type of story Scream V was assumingly going to tell based on the contents of that trailer, it sort of seemed like they were either taking cues from our idea or it was just like a big coincidence. My brain's going a million miles an hour. Yeah. Plus there's people commenting on the Ghostface movie about it. Just a bunch of people, including myself, who are kind of speculation because, you know, Hollywood looks at stuff. Not to say that our film was this huge, big, epic masterpiece that deserved the attention of Hollywood or anything. Like it's that spectacle of a thing. But there were things that I was like, that seems kind of close to ours. And like our movie was pretty original, I think, if I could toot my own horn. It wasn't something that was like a blatant, like this is the way the sequel should go. It wasn't like an obvious choice. So the fact that Scream V did certain things, or at least the trailer said it was going to, seemed kind of weird. Luckily, Scream V ended up being its own thing and had nothing really similar to our Ghostface fan film at all. But when the new Scream VI trailer, the full-length one, finally dropped, there were so many things in that fucking thing that I was like, ooh, this is really close to the contents of our fan film. Do I think the studio ripped us off necessarily? Probably not. I don't think so personally, but it's not out of the realm of possibility either. I mean, it's possible somebody saw that fan film and, or at least, you know, took a few of the ideas and ran with it. It's possible. Probably not. Again, I don't think Scream 6 or Paramount Pictures ripped off my little $100 Scream fan film. But it is possible, especially considering all the messages I started getting about the trailer without me having to say anything or post anything about it, I started getting messages of people saying like, this seems so much like the Ghostface fan film. And let me explain some of the things, like the stuff about the Ghostface shrine of previous killers. That's straight out of our fan film. Again, not saying they took it from ours, but it's a weird thing for them to take. In our fan film, it's never shown on screen as it is in the trailer for Scream VI, but it's suggested and it's sort of talked about because this killer in our film is a guy who's been collecting the actual weapons and masks and robes used by previous killers, especially Billy Loomis. So that was one thing. The other thing in the trailer is the beat-up old grungy mask. And if you look at our fan film, we have a beat-up old grungy mask. The design's not exactly the same. Ours is sort of a more rotting decay. Stuff's hanging off of it, and there's like black blood tears on it. The new one looks a little bit different than that, obviously, but it's sort of the same concept. And if this movie is really, a used mask by a previous killer, I'm going to assume it's either the mask of Billy or Stu. That's what I would assume the mask is. And in our fan film, the mask used by the killer is literally the mask used by Billy Loomis, stolen from the evidence depository. And it just seems weird. And like the whole, I'm not like the other ghost faces, I'm different. That's almost a line from my 2018 fan film. So it's just weird stuff like that, man. It's weird stuff about this killer. And in our fan film, Ghostface's whole point is that he doesn't want to be caught. He wants the franchise to be rebooted, but he can't successfully reboot it until he wipes out the original cast. He doesn't want to get caught. He doesn't want to reveal himself. He doesn't want to do any of that weird punchy stuff other Ghostfaces have done. He wants to remain anonymous as just straight up Ghostface. So I'm not sure if this movie's going to play out like that. Probably not, especially considering I sought out that spoiler and watched that spoiler. And unless it's an intentionally leaked spoiler, it's not really the real spoiler used in the film. I know how the movie ends, and it's not how my fan film goes. So anyways, there's just a lot of stuff like that in our fan film about, I'm not like the other ones. I'm different. Having the original mask or one of them, taking stuff from the evidence depositories, having a shrine of other killers, just weird stuff like that. Again, I wanted to make this video not to say, oh, Paramount Pictures ripped off my $100 fan film. That wasn't the point. I just wanted to sort of throw this out there and say, wouldn't it be fucking weird if they did take a cue or two from our film? Because again, these ideas, to me at least, aren't like obvious story fodder you would go with necessarily in a sequel, like the shrine, the original mask, all that stuff. It's just like, it's a weird coincidence 5 years removed from our fan film. I wanted to make the video and address it because I have gotten quite a bit of messages, not like a whole lot, but at least probably 7 or 8 of them. And to me, that's a lot. People saying, this seems really similar to yours, and what's going on, and did they steal your idea? And a friend of mine actually said, they probably stole your idea, and they probably didn't. I don't think Paramount or the writers or the producers ripped off 2018's Ghostface, but the similarities are not only cool, also very strange. So I guess, remains to be seen. We'll see next week or the week after, whenever I decide to go see this film. I'm not in a rush to see this fucking movie. I am not going to see it on opening night, probably. Maybe I'll see it in a matinee on Friday. I don't know, whatever. I'll see it when I see it. I'm not in a huge rush to see Scream VI, but yeah, weirder things have happened. So at work today, my coworker Anthony blew my fucking mind with a Scream idea during lunch break. And typically my other coworker James and I, we talk about Scream quite often during lunch break, coming up with better ideas as to how we would have made Scream 5 and so on and so forth. Just a lot of Scream garble, for lack of a better word. Why Scream 6 is doomed without Sidney, because it fucking is. You're wrong if you think otherwise. All that jazz you've heard me spew about before. And then out of nowhere, Anthony just comes at me with this idea. An idea that's been done in horror movies before. It's nothing new or completely original, but for Scream, this idea blew my fucking mind. It totally flipped my lunch tray. Not only has this idea never been done within the Scream franchise, but it would be absolutely perfect for a Scream sequel. Let's dive in. So this idea that I keep going on and on and on about is basically this in a nutshell. What if one of the Scream movies took place at an isolated cabin in the woods? This was his idea. And this instantly hit everybody with this wave of possibilities surrounding the idea. Just so much fucking potential. And I know, you're probably thinking to yourself, Yeah, but we've seen isolation horror movies plenty of times before. And yes, you are right. But not with a Scream movie, we haven't. Just picture this, okay? Let me give you a synopsis of an isolation horror Scream sequel. Northern California, out in the woods somewhere, middle of nowhere, okay? Sidney Prescott and her hubby and their kids are just hanging out, enjoying life, enjoying seclusion. Then suddenly her cell phone rings, and instead of a long, drawn-out Ghostface conversation, per the usual, Ghostface just says something like, "Gotcha," or "Found ya," and hangs up, and the next thing you know, Ghostface just starts laying siege to the cabin. I don't know if it would be one Ghostface or multiple ones, but either way, just start laying waste to the house. Molotov cocktails through the windows, gunfire, because apparently that's a thing now, whatever. Just something that gets the action going almost immediately, and until the movie ends, the action simply never, ever lets up. And this makes for such an intense runtime. Give the audience maybe 5 minutes of breathing time in the opening minutes of the film, and that's it. Let the rest of the fucking movie just absolutely be relentless. No pauses, no breaks, anxiety-reducing scenes of tranquility, just straight-up Ghostface savagery for 80+ minutes straight. And they're out in the fucking woods too, so maybe Ghostface brings a cell phone scrambler or something, once he's made the call to Sidney so nobody else can call in or out. And once the house itself is compromised, it's just a chase movie through the fucking woods. Cat and mouse. In a Northern California forest, no less. And maybe nobody's even really armed. Maybe Sidney has no knives or guns. Maybe she couldn't get to her gun. Maybe her husband couldn't get to his gun. Not even as much as a knife. They're just on their own. It's just them and the one or the two or the three or the four Ghostface killers. Possibly armed, possibly with vehicles of their own, straight up hunting Sidney and her family through the California woods. We're not worried about rules or franchise norms or any of that stuff. Nothing that we normally associate with Scream. It's just a straight up action horror movie turned up to 11. How awesome would that be? To me, this would have been loads and loads better of an idea than what they did with Scream V, and way more intriguing a concept to me than anything we've been shown for the forthcoming Scream VI. So what did you think about this idea? Let me know in the comments below. Love you, babe. Now get the fuck out of my face. Before I really get into the meat and potatoes of this video, let me start it off by saying that yes, I realize I'm making this video 3 months into the new year. And yes, I realize that makes me extremely late in getting this video out there. So when I see a bunch of you in the comments saying stuff like,
It's 2023, bro. It's been 2023 for 3 months.
Or 3 months late, bro. Just know that I'm gonna ban you from the channel. Just kidding. I love you. But anyways, let's dive in.
Come on.
2022 was such a great year for TobattoVision overall that it's almost hard to put into words, but I'm gonna try it anyway. 2022 really felt like the first official year of the channel, even though I technically created the channel in 2018, made my first real Just a Thought video in 2019, and uploaded here and there in the years between, such as music remasters, simple unboxing videos, mask videos, and sporadic Just a Thought videos, few and far in between. And of course, the infamous How to Fix Halloween 5 and 6 video. That stuff is all fine and dandy, and really did lay the groundwork for the current era TobattoVision. But again, I have to reinforce how much 2022 feels like the first real year for the channel, like its official debut year or something. When I first started the channel, I had every intention on posting consistently and as often as possible, dedicating myself to the cause entirely. But as life happens, life happened. Shanna and I got hit with a pregnancy, circumstances changed, and real life just became my priority, as it should be. Real life should be your priority, am I right? And with work and raising a family and everything else that comes in between, TobattoVision, although not put on hold entirely, very much took a back seat to everything else. I wasn't making content as often as I originally planned. I lost my comfy job in 2019. We got hit with COVID in 2020, and so on and so forth. Just a bizarre period of time. For everybody, not just myself, am I right? And these aren't complaints, these are just facts. There was just a lot of real life stuff going on in those years that were just more important to me versus diving into TobattoVision head first. And keep in mind, I wouldn't change a damn thing about how my life has turned out. There are no complaints here and certainly no regrets. I love my family, Shanna and I are engaged. Yes, still engaged. We haven't been able to pull the trigger on that one yet. I love my daughter Isabella. The pregnancy and becoming a dad has been life's ultimate adventure. Ongoing adventure at that, of course. Of course, losing my job and dealing with crazy COVID land was a drag in 2020, but as life tends to do, things eventually work out. I got myself a better job, and so on and so forth. Again, no regrets, no complaints here at all, just trying to showcase why those first few years of TobattoVision didn't really feel official to me, because it was more of a passive thing versus something in my general forefront. And yes, of course, I'm aware that my argument is invalid, and the channel was technically created in 18, and the first video dropped in 19, and dozens of uploads happened in between 19 and 22. I get it. I realize that. Yes, from reality's standpoint, those years count as any other years count. But I don't fucking live in reality, do I? I live in Tobatto land. And in 2022, seemingly out of nowhere, the tiniest bit of attention started being drawn to TobattoVision as a channel, via my Just a Thought videos and my music remaster videos, mask unboxings, and so on. Things were going great in life, my daughter was a full-blown toddler at this time, my new job was going great, Isabella was on a more consistent sleep schedule by this point, for the most part, knock on wood. Home life was happy, so I had the chance to sort of focus more on the channel if I wanted to. So I started honing in on more content than I had before on a more consistent basis. I started getting more comments, started getting more follows, started getting more subscribers, started getting more comments on my videos of people telling me what they liked and didn't like, haters, trolls, people who loved the stuff, people who hated the stuff, the whole bag. And again, not letting the channel dictate my life or my real life schedule or anything like that. Not letting it overrun my duties as a father or a fiance. Not letting the channel get in the way of anything in my personal or professional life, but slowly but surely incorporating it into my real life without taking anything away from anyone or anything else in it already, except for maybe some of my own sleep and my own sanity. But I would take those losses any day. I mean, who wouldn't? And then, in early spring of 2022, perhaps even late January, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Christian Hannah Horror of Planet CHH, his channel was still called Crime and Cocaine at that point in time, contacted me about going on his channel for an interview. He sort of liked what he was seeing on the channel at the time as far as the remasters and the Just a Thought videos and stuff go, and he wanted to have me on. So I did the interview, nervous as hell because I'm just generally anxious in real life anyway, and I'm the epitome of socially awkward and introverted when I'm not in Tobatto land. And you can tell that in that first interview. But nonetheless, the interview was a good time. Christian was more than generous in putting me on. And when it comes down to it, this is where, for lack of a better phrase, TobattoVision's 2022 expansion began. Because CHH put me on his channel last year, the channel has snowballed for me ever since. The video got a lot of positive response. People seem to be generally okay with me as a YouTuber. And it wasn't too long after that first interview that CHH had me back on his show for a second time. This time for an episode of the Unita Horror Podcast, still known as the Popcorn and Pandas Podcast at the time. And it was a blast. I met his co-host, Nick, from the Lost River Drive-In. And again, just another notch that ended up giving TobattoVision a huge surge of followers, subscribers, and all that stuff. And the aforementioned snowball continued. More Just a Thought videos were releasing more consistently, more remasters, more unboxings, just more and more and more content on the channel, happening more often and more regularly than before, all with a substantially bigger audience than any of the years prior, and growing quite quickly at that. It was not too long at all after that Unita podcast episode that the man with the plan, Garrett from Born to be Rad, still called Born to be Bad at the time, but he was facing a lawsuit from George Thorogood, so he had to change it to Born to be Rad, reached out to me as well after seeing my stuff with Planet CHH and the Unita podcast and whatnot. And he talked to me about nominating me for this new YouTuber of the Month thing or something like that, which was a really nice and cool thing to do on his part, and he didn't have to do that for me at all. I didn't end up doing it because I'm too lazy of a person to follow through with nominating other people thereafter and stuff, so I had to kindly decline, but the gesture from Garrett was fantastic nonetheless, and we stayed in touch thereafter, which eventually culminated in us doing a stream on his channel in the later months of 2022, and we also met a few times on additional CHH shows in between that time, and this is what I'm talking about, man. 2022. Great year for the channel. Great year for making some really good new friends. Christian, Garrett, Nick, all of these people who reached out and lent a brother some help when they didn't have to. I'm eternally grateful for that stuff. By the year's end, I had been on Garrett's channel for a stream. I had been on Nick's channel for a stream. I had been on Planet CHH multiple times at this point. TobattoVision had harnessed a pretty damn good following, going from 400 subscribers or so in January of 2022 to about just under 2K by the end of it. And at the time I'm making this video in 2023, I'm well over 2,400 and counting. I mean, that's awesome. All thanks to a semi-consistent posting routine, better content if I do say so myself, more actual movie reviews, plus all of the attention brought to the channel by Planet CHH, having me on his show multiple times, as well as Nick, as well as Garrett, and it's been an absolute blast meeting everybody else as well. I mean, I met so many awesome folks last year via these other three guys. It just blows my mind. Obviously Christian and Nick and Garrett, but also Ken from Mid-Level Media, badass. Mel from My Killer Podcast, badass. Justin from Movie Watch Daily, badass. Piz, badass. The boys from Dead Pit, badasses. Steak Sauce from Off the Grill Podcast, badass. Lauren from Visited by Voices, and certainly others that I've encountered over the last year as well. All badasses, and apologies if I didn't say your name in this roll call. It's nothing personal. I'm just an idiot and I forget everybody's name. So please don't take it personally. Don't come for me. But yeah, just so much content in 2022. Movie reviews, Just a Thought videos, unboxings, Leatherface Day for God's sakes. I mean, that stuff was awesome. 2022, monumental year for TobattoVision. And although not technically TobattoVision's first year on YouTube, a year that feels like TobattoVision's first real year on YouTube, if that makes any sense. And this quote-unquote success, if you want to call it that, is something that hopefully continues into the latter part of 2023 and 2024, and wherever this channel ends up. I mean, I'm 36 years old now, so I really have no idea what the ultimate goal for the channel is or where it will end up. I'm going to take the rest of 2023 as it comes instead of my usual panicking and over-planning, but I hope that TobattoVision, in the least, continues to grow and get better. Of course, real-life priorities first, family, 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 the way it should be. So if I'm ever slacking in uploads or engagement here and there, just know that it's because I'm out there trying to be the best dad and fiance that I can be. Whether that means going for days and days on end with no activity here or not, just know that while TobattoVision is one of my passions, the passion will always be my family first over everything else. And sometimes I prefer to play old school 16-bit video games over making new content. So there's that. So thank you all for helping me make 2022 a fantastic year for TobattoVision. Shout out to Kristen Hannah Horror of Planet CHH for putting me on, Garrett, Nick, everybody else. Love you guys. Some of the coolest people and friends I've had the pleasure of knowing. And in all honesty, I feel like I speak to these people more now than I actually do my own real life quote-unquote friends. Isn't that weird? People I've known for 30 plus years, I hardly talk to them, but these guys I met online last year, I mean, life is strange, man. Life is really, really weird. But here's to a lot of great memories. Hopefully many, many more. Cheers, my friends. After spending months and months speaking ill of the film regarding Sidney Prescott and her absence, extensively spoiling the plot for myself once spoilers became available, and generally boycotting actually seeing the film in theaters for a week after its initial release, I finally decided to head out for an afternoon matinee showing of Scream VI on one random Friday after work. After spending 2 hours in a darkened theater, thankfully completely alone, gorging myself on an unhealthy amount of butter-saturated milk duds, extra buttery popcorn, and a large cherry Coke poured into a special Scream souvenir cup. The end credits finally rolled. I was hit yet again with the surprisingly good Mike Shinoda song,
Let it begin.
and was soon thereafter told by the franchise's new Randy, in one way or the other, how stupid I was for waiting around for an expected post-credit scene, which I already knew existed within the film, but I had to see it for myself.
Not every movie needs a post-credit scene.
I'm not sure if it's because my expectations and plot desires were basically null and void by the time I actually saw the film, due to spoiling it for myself. I'm not sure if it's because I'm just not invested in this franchise anymore in the way I used to be, perhaps a combination of both, but I cannot begin to describe to you how much of a good time I had with Scream VI, which in and of itself was the most unexpectedly pleasant aspect of seeing the film. The absence of Sidney Prescott, which I will never be a fan of no matter where the franchise goes, was handled with grace and care. The brutality and aggressiveness of Ghostface was absolutely on point. The New York City setting was a surprisingly welcome location for the story, even though we don't see a whole lot of NYC on display within the film itself, but that's another video for another time. Perhaps a Coziness of Scream VI video is in order? I thought the cast all did a damn good job, especially Melissa Barrera as Sam. She really stepped up her game in this movie. I really liked the return of Kirby. She was a welcome return from Scream IV, and contrary to what everyone else was saying, I loved her characterization in Scream VI. And of course, Courtney Cox as Gale Weathers, our only true remaining OG cast member from the original storyline, and I was happy to see how organically her character fit within the setting of the film. She's already based in NYC, as we saw in Scream V. She's made aware of the new murders, she reconnects with Sam and Tara, and so on and so forth. To me, her presence just felt so much more organic in this film than it did in Scream V, which is mind-blowing for me to say, especially considering how damn awesome Dewey was in Scream V. But yeah, Gale just seemed to fit this movie better, and was given more to do for the overall story. Again, that absolutely blows my mind to admit, but it is what it is. I was also really thankful to see that they didn't kill Gale off. I was going to be pissed if they actually did that. I mean, let's be honest, killing Dewey in Scream V was a big mistake. Also a forthcoming video. So killing Gale off in Scream VI would have also been a huge mistake. I'm really glad Radio Noise learned their lesson with that one. But yeah, everything about this movie worked for me, and I enjoyed every single minute of its runtime. The pace was fast, the dialogue was good, the acting was good, I believed all of the characters. Force Ghost Billy was a welcomed return. I mean, I just loved Scream VI. Not just liked, I loved Scream VI. And on a side note, I am so happy to report that, contrary to my previous concerns, Scream VI did not rip off our 2018 fan film. I mean, the use of Billy Loomis's mask, the shrine, the more aggressive Ghostface, and all that jazz, we definitely did that stuff first in our film, and this came a little uncomfortably close to that. But in Scream VI, the motive was different, the execution was different, and so on and so forth. So I am very happy to report that. For anybody who cares, that is. Now, I love all of the Scream movies, even Scream V, but I have to admit that when I rewatched Scream V a few days before seeing Scream VI, the third act of Scream V really dragged for me. I was almost bored, if we're being honest. In Scream VI, I was never bored. At all. Even knowing how everything was going to play out, I was not bored in the slightest. And I think I place Scream VI above Scream V in the ranking, at least right now. And again, I can't begin to describe to you how sacrilegious this sounds to me, considering Sidney and Dewey are both in Scream V. Scream VI just worked better as a movie for me. The only thing about Scream VI that I thought was a bit weak was the motivations of the killers and their connections to Richie, but I can buy it for the sake of the plot. I think Richie was sort of a popcorn fart of a killer in Scream V, and I think this movie makes his legacy larger than it should be. But again, I can buy it for the sake of this Scream 2-esque parental revenge storyline, which it is. I'll make a full movie review for this film down the road, but I just had to get it out there how crazy a thing it is that not only did I like Scream 6, I loved Scream 6. Should have been Scream and the number 6 versus the Roman numeral 6, especially if they weren't going to use it in the logo itself in the actual title card. I mean, look at how awesome the Brazilian title card looks. Again, another video for another time. But yes, Scream 6 for the absolute win. I miss Sydney. I want her back in the franchise. I want Gail back for part 7. I still say Stu Macher is calling all the shots. Hashtag Stu lives. All that jazz. Thank you for watching. Go see Scream 6 in theaters. But anyways, I digress. Love you, babe. Now get the fuck out of my face. What is woke? Why are people so angry about its usage? Why are people in all walks of life being called racists or bigots or fascists simply for using the word woke? Why are people being kicked out of forums and banned from discussions for using the word? Why are Facebook groups and YouTubers stifling those who use the word, but catering to those who despise it? Why is woke such a volatile word within the world of horror? Let's take a look.
Keep it up, just keep it up!
Now, back in the day, the phrase woke could pretty much be attributed to content that was simply shining a light on certain topics via movies, TV shows, comic books, novels, what have you. Stuff like racism, politics, and so on and so forth. Content that was shedding light on subjects that were more or less overlooked on a mainstream scale, stating its message through the plot beats of the stories being told, but never hitting you over the head in a way that made you forget the story being told in the first place, nor anything that seemed to be pushing an underlying agenda. These days, and I am absolutely convinced of this, it seems that woke is being used in a much different way. It's being used to call out identity politics that is hitting people over the heads with underlying agendas, to the point that media today seems more concerned with sending a message and pushing an agenda versus telling the story at hand. It's almost undeniable at this point. Modern pulp culture, even in the realm of horror, a lot, not all, but a lot of content creators, movie studios, what have you, are more focused and more obsessed with sending cut and dry messages about race, gender, politics, or whatever it may be, and pushing their own insane agendas than they are with telling a good and enjoyable story. These people aren't racists for saying woke. They aren't bigots or homophobes or politically stunted because they use woke to describe media that is more concerned with pushing the message than it is with telling a good story. Do homophobes and racists and bigots and unicorns and dinosaurs exist? Yes. Does using the word woke automatically make you a racist or a homophobe or a bigot or whatever the hell else? No. So, with that said, what is the deal with this weird attack on people who use the word? I'll tell you why. Because people and movie studios and big corporations need a boogeyman to blame all of their problems on. And when you're pushing race-baiting topics, identity politics, or just politics in general, with the intention of furthering your message, whatever that may be, and alienating one side of the spectrum or the other in favor of that message, then you better have a backup plan to explain yourself away when that message fails to bring in the money. And what a better way to explain away your failures than to blame it all on racists, homophobes, bigots, unicorns, whatever. Because if people are calling out your false agenda for what it is, and the content trying to push that agenda is failing, then you simply call out those using the word woke as racists, homophobes, bigots. Blame them for your content's failures. Align Hollywood with the same mindset, and influence everyone on the opposite side of the spectrum to follow suit. It can't possibly be the content that's bad. It can't possibly be that nobody wants to be spoon-fed the message or hit over the head with an agenda. No. It's because everyone who doesn't like terrible agenda-pushing content is racist or bigoted, especially those who use the word woke. So if someone used the word woke, be sure to kick them off forums, kick them off Facebook groups, ban the use of the word, because they're just racist, white, bigoted, Republican, conservative men who hate women and terrorize ethnic groups and sexual orientations other than their own. And this isn't even an exaggeration. This is literally how strongly these movie studios and big corporations and big government have influenced these people into thinking that using the word woke means this stuff, when in reality, people are just pointing out terrible content that is trying to push an agenda and further a message when it should be telling a story and giving people their money's worth. Just saying. So anyways, I'm rambling here. But when it comes down to the question of what is woke, I know what I believe the word to be, which again is content that is made to push an agenda first and foremost and tell a story second, which is bullshit. But again, I came across a very well put explanation of what the word woke is, what woke really means, why we say it, and why the opposite end of the spectrum needs to stop belittling people who do use the word, and start realizing that they are protecting agenda-pushing corporations and narrative-inducing studios, who are in reality doing the same thing to them. With that said, check out this epic explanation of the word woke, taken from an unknown Reddit user and polished up by yours truly. Woke. When a business, studio, or corporation begins changing key aspects of a beloved and long-running property, usually of the entertainment variety, to expand the fan base and potential financial opportunities by catering to franchise outsiders who had zero interest in the product and mutating said product until it does appeal to them. Often, a company will attempt to cash in on trendy political movements, social issues, and so on. There's also a strong chance that most of, if not all, the company executives in charge of making these decisions do not actually believe in the message at hand, but are doing so for praise, press, overall clout on social media platforms, and of course, the aforementioned monetary possibilities. The publicity and reinvigoration of interest in the IP will bring forth a new monetized base of customers who would typically show zero interest in the product. And number two, the anger, resentment, and apathy of pre-existing customers regarding these changes will eventually subside, leading these quote-unquote legacy fans to eventually resume consuming the product once again. On the other hand, there are some cases where these companies really do believe in the message and want to purge non-believers from the respective IP's fanbase, likening their monetary support as tainted money. They will often mock former customers on social media and/or in the news, encouraging them not to buy the product. The media itself is also notorious for misconstruing words and exacerbating the problem further as well, not only as a form of clickbait, but also in adding fuel to the fire and further expanding the rift between the respective IP and these toxic fans. The entire debacle of the modern pop culture era has created a territorial rift in the fandom, with a strong us versus them debate that can carry on for weeks, months, or even years. This tarnishes the value of the product itself and damages the trustworthiness of the company overall. And let's be real here, this is not a left versus right problem. This is not a conservative versus liberal problem. This is not a Jason Goes to Hell versus Freddy's Dead problem. This is an us, as in the fandom as a whole, versus the agenda problem, which no matter what side you personally align with at the moment, is coming for you one way or the other. Whether you're left, right, upside down, whatever, you may think the message aligns with your way of life and your way of thinking, but eventually, you're going to be the ones bitching about IPs being ruined in favor of the other side. And if any of that sounds preachy or conspiracy theorist to you, sorry to burst your bubble, but that's the damn truth. The question is, how do we fix it? Well, this is how. We go back to making entertainment about the entertainment first and foremost. Not everything has to be a construct of the current social or political landscape, one side or the other. We can go back to making art for the sake of being enjoyed. This stuff is, after all, supposed to be enjoyable, am I right? I don't know about you guys, but I hate the fact that almost every single thing being made these days can never just be a good old-fashioned storytelling exercise. Everything has to be a message, or an agenda, or the alienation of one political spectrum over the other, and so on and so forth. So in closing, the next time you kick somebody out of a forum or a Facebook group, ban the use of the word woke itself, or refer to somebody as a bigot, racist, or homophobe because they use the word woke, think long and hard about all of the stuff I just said, about what a film, TV show, or comic book being woke really means. And think about why you are so adamant in defending these corporations, movie studios, producers, whatever, pushing these hidden agendas, than you are in the preservation of the entertainment itself. Maybe you're on the wrong side of the argument here. But anyways, I digress. Love you, babe. Now get the fuck out of my face. When it was first announced that Scream VI would be taking place in New York City, the idea of the film being this sprawling slasher epic across the entire city seemed more like a probability than a possibility. But alas, once filming was underway, it became apparent that Scream VI would sort of be taking a page from the Jason Takes Manhattan playbook, in that most of the filming locations took place in locations other than New York City. Whereas Jason Takes Manhattan filmed a large portion of its NYC scenes in Vancouver, Scream VI was filmed almost entirely in Montreal. But, like Jason Takes Manhattan, once you watch the film and get absorbed by its story, you don't really notice that Scream VI, for the most part, isn't actually taking place in the city that never sleeps. They do a good job of at least making it feel in the spirit of the Big Apple enough that the story can play out naturally, and, of course, the use of stock footage cityscape shots helps flesh this out as well. With that said, however, there is a weird coziness about Scream VI's locations that feels so much more intimate than you'd expect a New York City-based slasher sequel to be. And when I say cozy, I don't mean cozy in the vein of Halloween 2, or even the original Scream, but cozy in the sense that the majority of locations in Scream VI feel like very self-contained spaces that don't really interconnect with the supposedly sprawling city that surround them. And I'm not sure if that's because most of this wasn't shot in New York City itself, so it has this dreamy quality from that aspect alone, or what. But this is either making total sense to you, or you're thinking to yourself, what the hell is this guy talking about? Cozy? Scream VI? What? Well, The weirdness of this video topic stops me from reaching everybody, but I'm hoping that at least most of you can pick up what I'm putting down. I mean, think about it. The portions of Central Park, Sam's apartment, the Shrine Theater, the restaurant at the beginning, Gail's apartment, even the alleyway at the beginning of the film where the teacher gets murdered. There's something so small scale and vibe that really adds to this quote-unquote cozy atmosphere. Even the little shop where Ghostface is blowing people away with a shotgun feels small scale, intimate, and cozy, like some NYC-based after-school special or something. Does this make any sense to anybody out there? Matter of fact, the only part of this film that really feels big is the subway scene. And that's not really a grand scene with the city on display either. So with that said, Scream VI never really feels like this Die Hard with a Vengeance, sprawling epic through the boroughs of NYC, but feels more like a string of cozy, yet somewhat isolated locations tucked within the city somewhere. And while our cast is going through the worst possible situations, it never feels like NYC itself or the millions of people in it are at all involved with the chaos at hand. And to me, this really gives it that small scale, intimate, atmosphere-driven, and cozy quality. That is the best way I can explain it. Love you, babe. Now, get the fuck out of my face. I don't care what side of the fence you sit on. I don't care how much of a Scream fan you think you are, or claim to be. I don't care if you have 0 subscribers or 1 million subscribers. If you are one of these people who think killing Dewey off in Scream V was a good idea, then you are wrong. Scream was a franchise that had 3 lovable heroes that audiences simply never wanted to watch die in any of the sequels, no matter how many sequels were ever going to be made, no matter who the other characters were, or what have you. Nobody, and I mean nobody, wanted to ever see Sidney, Dewey, or Gail killed in a Scream sequel. The filmmakers already fucked up in Scream 2 by killing off Randy, and let's be honest, the franchise has never truly been the same since. So you would think that these filmmakers would have learned their lesson at this point. But no. Throw radio noise in there and this dumb need to subvert expectations, as they say, and suddenly our main man, Dewey, the legend himself, was both figuratively, poetically, and actually left on the cutting room floor, killed off by 2 of the dumbest and most popcorn fart scream killers ever, no less. I mean, what were they thinking? Think of Sidney, Gail, and Dewey as the horror equivalent of Star Wars' Han Solo, Princess Leia, and Luke Skywalker. 3 characters you love to see in sticky situations and dangerous confrontations, but ones that you never, ever, ever, absolutely under no circumstances want to see killed off. Thanks for fucking that up, Disney. And I don't care what the fuck Harrison Ford says. Killing off Han Solo was a mistake. So with that said, radio noise Han Solo'd our Dewey. I attribute this to a lot of the nonsensical fanboy bullshit that was floating around the interwebs in the few years prior to the release of Scream. This mounting idea that, quote, if they ever do another Scream movie, they're going to have to kill off one of the main characters to prove that they're serious this time around. End quote. This moronic bullshit mindset that seems to think that the only way to prove that the stakes in a Scream sequel are real is if you kill off either Sidney or Gail or Dewey. Well, that thought process was, is, and always will be bullshit! You don't have to kill off one of the main characters to prove that the stakes are real. You could just, I don't know, do what every other Scream movie prior to this one has done. Give us a cast of lovable side characters and supporting characters and butcher them in terrible, terrible ways. You don't need to kill off Gail or Dewey or Sidney to prove that these stakes, in a fictional story no less, are real. What the fuck does that even mean anyway? Prove that the stakes are real this time. You fucking morons. You guys fucked it up. You people fucked it up. We lost Dewey because of your bullshit mindset. Way to go. Again, did we ever for a minute not buy into the action and drama and potential danger of a Star Wars movie because we knew in our hearts that none of the core three would die? No. The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi were filled with quote-unquote oh shit moments, tense moments, scenes of dread, and so on and so forth. And never once was the story impeded by the fact that we knew none of them would actually die. If the writing is good and the drama is good, you will still buy into it. But of course, this is reliant on good writing and good storytelling, not the shock factor of killing off a main character for the sheer sake of being shocking and proving to your audience that you're not messing around. Now, I enjoyed Scream V and I loved Scream VI, but do you realize how awesome the third act of Scream V would have been if Dewey was still alive? Do you realize how epic it would have been to see our disgruntled and grizzled older Dewey Riley showing up in New York City to protect Gale in Scream VI? That would have been awesome. But no, we just had to have a main character die in Scream V, didn't we? We just had to. By again, 2 popcorn fart killers no less. And specifically, at least according to Amber, her. She's the one who did it. And she was even more of a popcorn fart killer than Richie was. Plus, she's like 4'5". How does that work? Unless that was actually Stu who killed Dewey in that hospital, or perhaps Dewey himself is actually the ultimate killer and his death in Scream V was staged. I'll accept either of those options. Dewey's death was something Scream fans never wanted to see in a Scream movie, because frankly, having Dewey around is just more fun than not. And that goes for Sidney and Gale too. If you feel that strongly about removing legacy characters from the franchise, then write them out. Don't kill them off. I mean, nobody wanted this, except, of course, for the aforementioned Scream cucks who just had to see one of our Legacy 3 die at the hands of a Ghostface killer. But again, come on. At least let the man go out saving Gale or Sidney directly, or even Sam or Tara for that matter, not indirectly by sending them off in an elevator while he stays behind and doesn't immediately pull the trigger. This action jeopardizes everyone he cared about because his death here meant that he wouldn't be around later to protect them. So not only did they kill off our main man, but they made him dumb right before doing so. Bad move, Radio Noise. Bad move. Dewey did not deserve this. The Scream franchise didn't deserve this. We as Scream fans didn't deserve this. We deserved a chase sequence through Times Square on Halloween, where Dewey is chasing after the real Ghostface amidst a sea of Ghostface costumes, completely out of his element, completely bewildered, but all Dewey Riley, doing his best to save the day and protect those he cares about. But instead, they gave us this. In closing, Dewey should not have died. Scream V was okay, Scream VI was awesome, but would have been even better with the active presence of Dewey Riley. And as was the case with Randy, the franchise will never fully recover from this blunder. I still say it could have been Stu in that costume though. I mean, look at how big that Ghostface is. Amber could have very well been full of shit. Anyways, love you, babe. Now get the fuck out of my face. In the grand scheme of things, this is really a small gripe, but as somebody who really does love the prospect of marketing campaigns for big films, especially big horror films, such as Scream VI, which actually did have a pretty big marketing push, I tend to let small details that bug me turn into even bigger details that really bug me. And in this instance, again, we're talking about Scream VI. Let me start this off by saying that I was both surprised and pleased to see that the powers that be actually had the balls to name this film Scream VI versus Scream exclamation point, or Six Cream, or Scream and 2 exclamation points, or Scream and a subtitle. They actually just ran with Scream VI. Solid, bold, and to the point. And for the 5th sequel in a horror franchise, sometimes being bold and simple is all you need when it comes to a title. The only thing I wasn't a huge fan of was moving to Roman numerals versus the traditional numbering style. That kind of irks my OCD when I look at the series as a whole, but I'll be damned if that VI incorporated into the logo doesn't look absolutely fantastic. The VI becoming the right side of the M? Fantastic. Absolutely fan-fucking-tastic. So once I saw the way the logo was designed and the incorporation of the Roman numerals themselves, I was on board completely with the marketing campaign for this film. Again, simple, bold, to the point, and looked great stretched out on posters, billboards, what have you. Absolutely no clutter whatsoever. But then, after all the great commercials, the TV spots, the posters, the merchandise, and so on and so forth, it was finally time to see Scream VI and view that epically bold logo on screen. I assumed Ghostface would probably rip through the screen with his knife, per usual, and the logo would simply be a white Scream logo, with the M morphing into the red VI, just as it had in pretty much all of the marketing content. But alas, what we actually got on screen, within the film itself, was not the marketing logo that we had gotten used to by this point. What we got was the Scream logo, with the Roman numerals appearing behind it, not the M morphing into the VI. And I will admit, it still looks cool in its own right, it still does the job and all that jazz, but it also feels and looks like a big missed opportunity, considering how strong the marketing logo is. So, why the change? Well, I think it boils down to a hefty combination of laziness and efficiency at the same time. Because while the movie was released all over the world, per usual, perhaps they simply ran out of time to animate that logo for every country, region, area, whatever. Because the marketing logo, while not an overly complicated animation, is still one that would take quite a while to render out, especially if you're doing it for places all over the world. But if you were to simply show the Scream logo and drop the number behind the logo and have nothing morphing into something else, that's a far more simple execution than the aforementioned M animation itself. I think that's probably why they went this route. With that said, I posted on my community feed last year, stating how awesome the Scream VI logo could look if they went Scream 2 style and simply had the 6 behind the logo. And keep in mind, this was way before we saw the official logo released. But I mean, look at that. In its own throwback way, I love this design. And no, I am not the one who designed the logo you're looking at right now. So, going back to the way the logo actually looks on screen within the movie, I am left wondering why they didn't just put a traditional number behind the Scream logo if they were going to execute the logo in this way versus animating the M. It would keep in tradition with the other Scream movies, looks cooler, bolder, and if they were going to just throw the number behind the Scream logo anyway, they could have just went back to the actual numbering system.
This is what the Scream VI title card looked like for the Latin American Spanish release of the film.
And it looks fantastic. Why they didn't do that here in the States? I don't know. I get the keeping in line with the marketing's Roman numeral aspect, but damn, look at how awesome this looks, especially when you put it next to the Roman numeral versions. You see what I mean? Anyways, I digress. Scream VI was a lot of fun either way, and I'm just happy it wasn't called something other than Scream VI. Love you, babe. Now, get the fuck out of my face. Let's talk about Halloween 2018 for a few minutes. As many of you know, and if you're new to the channel, you're about to find out, I am not a fan of Halloween 2018. I don't absolutely hate the film like I used to during the first couple years of its initial release, but it's still near the bottom of the barrel for me when it comes to Halloween movies. With that said, I absolutely loved Halloween Kills, and I despised Halloween Ends. But that's besides the point. Right now we are strictly talking about Halloween 2018, and a gimmick that could have potentially made the movie tons and tons more fun than it was, but at the same time may have hurt its marketing campaign. Let's dive in. Specifically, we're focusing on Laurie Strode here, and specifically the inclusion of Laurie Strode in this movie in the first place. And what I mean by that is this. The movie was heavily marketed as a direct sequel to the original film, disregarding all of their entries, even the 1981 masterpiece that is Halloween 2, and was also heavily marketed as the return of Jamie Lee Curtis to the franchise as Laurie Strode. You had the secondary gimmick of this being a direct sequel to the original film, sort of, as well as the front and center gimmick of focusing not only on the supposed triumphant return of Laurie Strode, but the supposed triumphant return of Jamie Lee Curtis herself. That's all fine and dandy. I suppose when the franchise was where it was in 2018, you sort of needed a good shot-in-the-arm marketing gimmick to hook fans back in. So when they got Jamie Lee Curtis back on board, I'm sure that's pretty much all the studios wanted to focus on. Really grab people's attention and hook old fans back into the franchise. But here's my issue. The gimmick of this being a direct sequel to the original, and disregarding all of the events besides the 1978 film, was absolutely enough of a hook. I mean, there's no denying that Jamie Lee's involvement skyrocketed interest and marketing pliability when it came to advertising and whatnot. But let me run a scenario by you and see if you agree that this would have been much cooler than what they actually did, with not only the marketing campaign, but the movie itself. Imagine, if you will, that the marketing for the film didn't mention anything about Laurie Strode or Jamie Lee Curtis's involvement with the film, but was marketed only as a big-budget direct sequel to the original film. No mention of Curtis whatsoever. The marketing campaign goes into full effect, teaser trailers, TV spots aplenty, garnering heavy interest in the film, but still not showing anything related to Laurie Strode or Jamie Lee Curtis. Then, the movie comes out, everyone sits down in darkened theaters across the country on opening night, and suddenly, right after that opening scene at the asylum and the journalists arriving at the mysterious compound in the woods and hearing a voice on the call box, the first time we ever collectively see Laurie Strode on screen is that first shot of her dragging the chair across the room, collectively realizing that not only is Jamie Lee Curtis back in the film, but she's presumably the lead character of the film. This wouldn't necessarily have made the movie better for me overall, but it perhaps would have been a cooler way to do it versus the Jamie Lee Curtis oversaturation we got well before the 2018 film actually released. The surprise would have been real, and the impact of that surprise would have been absolutely unreal. But I digress. What do you think about this idea? Let me know in the comments below. So this is sort of an addendum to my previous video regarding Halloween 2018 and Laurie Strode and how cooler of a thing it would have been if the marketing campaign had kept her a secret from fans until the film's premiere. And we're going to be taking that concept even further in this video. Hear me out. Laurie Strode and the return of Jamie Lee Curtis is kept a secret during the marketing campaign for Halloween 2018. We shift the plot of the movie around a bit, and instead of focusing on Laurie Strode right from the jump, we instead focus on either the journalists trying to learn more about Myers himself, Deputy Hawkins still dealing with his own demons regarding what happened on Halloween night back in 1978, or a combination of the two. Perhaps he and the journalists cross path for the majority of the film, and they work together to stop Myers once he breaks out. Whatever the plot is, fine, as long as we don't see or hear about Laurie Strode's current existence or whereabouts whatsoever. Yet, this means no Allison and no Karen, which I am perfectly fine with if we're being honest. Myers would inevitably escape. The journalists would both be documenting the incident and aiding Hawkins in his own quest to stop Myers, and so on and so forth. But then, as we leave the second act of the film and begin the third act, perhaps we're on a busy Haddonfield neighborhood street where everyone is outside trick-or-treating. Hawkins and the journalists are elsewhere. Myers shows up on the street, similar to his rampage scene in Halloween 2018 already. And after killing someone in the middle of the street who gets in his way or something, there's loud commotion, kids and parents are running and screaming, and at the end of the street, in maybe a cul-de-sac turnaround area, there's a dark house with its porch lights off. But as the screaming gets louder and louder, and Myers starts slicing and dicing more and more in the midst of this madness, we, the viewers, see the porch light turn on, the door opens. We follow the feet of somebody walking out of that house and onto their porch. We tilt up, And that's when we finally see Laurie Strode, in all of her old woman badassness, staring into the sea of chaos before her, wondering what the hell is going on. This would be the first time we see Jamie Lee Curtis, the first time we see Laurie Strode, the first time we ever even realize that her presence is actually an active presence in Haddonfield, in this movie. I mean, how badass would this be? She moves off the porch, walks into the street trying to see what the issue is. She's asking parents what's wrong, what's going on, and so forth, until she comes to a small clearing in the crowd where Myers is finishing off another victim. And boom, she sees him, he turns his head and sees her, she knows exactly who he is, he knows exactly who she is, he drops his victim, she angrily turns around and runs back to her house, telling people to get inside now. He begins quickly walking after her, ignoring everyone else in the crowd now. She gets into her house, turns all of her security lights on and stuff. And keep in mind, her house in this version would be in this cul-de-sac in the middle of a neighborhood, not out in the woods like the fucking Unabomber. She gears up, grabs her shotgun, whatever, notifies Hawkins, her walkie-talkie. This brings Hawkins and the journalist straight to Laurie's house, and we end with a Laurie versus Michael fight in the house, sort of similar to Halloween 2018. And by the time Hawkins and the journalists arrive, Michael is already dead. Perhaps the house is on fire. I mean, who knows? It can play out however you want to write it. But the point is, we don't get that epic Laurie reveal until the end of the second act and the beginning of the third. Does that sound awesome to you? Would you have liked to see Halloween 2018 play out this way? Or are you happy with how it turned out? Let me know in the comments below. I look forward to telling you how wrong you are. Horror movies have been a popular genre in the film industry for decades, with countless iconic villains appearing on the big screen. However, the horror movie icons of the 1970s and 1980s seemingly still reign supreme in terms of worldwide popularity and fan recognition. These villains, including the likes of Freddy Krueger, Leatherface, Jason Voorhees, and Michael Myers, continue to captivate audiences today, even more so than any other competing horror icons of modern times. Besides an honorable mention to Ghostface, there just hasn't been an icon over the last couple decades that has reached the heights of the aforementioned slashers of yesteryear. But why do these horror movie icons continue to be so popular, and why have they stood the test of time? Firstly, these horror movie icons have a distinct and memorable appearance that is easily recognizable. Freddy Krueger, for example, is known for his disfigured and badly burned face and body, razor blade glove, and iconic striped sweater. Leatherface, from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is known for his mask made from human skin and the chainsaw he wields. Jason Voorhees, from the Friday the 13th series, is known for his iconic hockey mask and machete. And finally, Michael Myers of the Halloween franchise is known for his emotionless white mask and butcher knife. These distinctive appearances have become ingrained in popular culture and are instantly recognizable, making these characters memorable and iconic, even in this day and age. Moreover, these horror movie icons have extensive film franchises behind them, with many sequels, prequels, and remakes produced over the years. These franchises have helped keep the characters in the public eye and have contributed to their continued popularity. For example, there have been 12 Friday the 13th films, including one crossover event and one reboot. There have been 9 Nightmare on Elm Street films, including one crossover event and one remake, and 13 Halloween films, with tons of sequels, requels, reboots, with presumably more sequels and remakes in the works sooner than later. Over the years, these franchises have continually introduced new audiences to these characters, helping to cement their seemingly perpetual place in pop culture. Another reason for the enduring popularity of these horror movie icons is their rich and sometimes complex storylines, usually preceding the events of what we as the audience sees on screen within the films themselves, but rather filled in via off-screen exposition. These icons are typically not just mindless killing machines, but often have quote-unquote reasonings which explain their motivations and actions. One example being Freddy Krueger, who was a child murderer who was burned alive by angry parents. Therefore, he seeks to punish these parents via his role as a supernatural dream demon, killing their children as revenge. These backstories make the characters more interesting and give them a level of depth that many other horror villains lack, which also makes them, in a sense, more relatable to audiences than their modern counterparts. Not because we relate to murdering people with chainsaws or killing children, but because it's easier to believe someone with a fleshed out backstory rather than just some serial killer in a mask killing people for the sake of the film's shock value. Which I do love sometimes, don't get me wrong. Let's not forget about the practical effects versus digital effects argument as well, which I do believe plays a part in this conversation. These 70s and 80s villains were created in a time when slasher films were still relatively new and uncharted territory. The filmmakers had to rely on practical effects, makeup, and suspense to create scares, rather than relying on jump scares and CGI. This resulted in horror movies that were more grounded and realistic, with characters that audiences could believe in and relate to. In contrast, modern horror movies often rely on technology to create scares, which can result in films that feel disconnected and less relatable to audiences. Finally, the enduring popularity of these horror movie icons can also be attributed to nostalgia. Many people who grew up in the 1970s and 80s have very fond memories of watching these films, often with friends and family. They became a part of their childhood and remain a source of nostalgia for many people, even to this very day. This nostalgia has resulted in a continued interest in the characters and their films, even among younger audiences who may not have been alive when the movies were first released, but are taking part in the nostalgic boom of their parents, their aunts, their uncles, and the current nostalgia explosion of pop culture itself. In conclusion, the horror movie icons of the 70s and 80s, especially the likes of Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Leatherface, and Michael Myers, continue to be more popular today than any other competing horror icons of modern times. Their iconic appearances, extensive film franchises, sometimes anti-hero statuses, somewhat relatability to audiences, and the aforementioned nostalgia factor have all contributed to their continued popularity. Again, honorable mentions to Ghostface, and we'll throw a few honorable mentions at Victor Crowley and Jigsaw as well. Art the Clown is still working on it though. Let's check back in a few more years and see where he's at. Love you, babe. Now get the fuck out of my face. I've said this before, but I will go on record again. The 2004 remake of Dawn of the Dead is one of the most frightening zombie movies ever made. It takes the general concept of the original George Romero film, but cranks the scare factor up to 11. Unlike the slow-moving zombies of the original Dawn, these rotten creatures are fast, vicious, and seemingly unstoppable. Their speed alone makes them frightening, but the way they move and behave really takes it to the next level. They are relentless in their pursuit of the living, and the audience is truly left with this feeling of dread, as if there is no escape, which there isn't. The opening sequence of the film sets the tone for the rest of the movie. We see Anna going about her normal routine before chaos erupts. The first zombie we see is a little girl who has become infected, and we, as the audience, are immediately put on edge once her disfigured face is revealed. The fact that the virus has affected someone so young adds to the horror and the dread. Not that the original didn't have zombified kids. but the frantic behavior and almost rabid physicality of the zombified little girl in the remake really lends to the indiscriminate and uncaring nature of this supposed virus. From there, the situation spirals completely out of control, and we are introduced to a world that has been quickly and absolutely overrun by the undead. The characters in the movie are not just one-dimensional tropes either, and like the original film, our cast is comprised of real people with their own personalities, motivations, and flaws. They are not just there to be killed off one by one, but rather, they are integral to the plot, and their interactions with each other, both positive and negative, add to the film's overall flow and ever-building tension. We have a diverse group of survivors who are forced to band together to survive. They are not all friends, and they don't always get along, but they are united in their fight against these flesh-eating abominations. The film's social commentary is another reason why it stands out as a horror movie, and this concept was very much explored in the original film as well. It explores themes such as consumerism and the breakdown of society, and shows how quickly our world can break down in the face of a crisis, and how people can become desperate and violent. The survivors end up taking refuge in a mall, and the movie shows how people can still become obsessed with material possessions, even in the face of something like a zombie apocalypse. Supposedly, according to film theorists, and I believe even Romero himself, zombies are in fact a metaphor for mindless consumerism and how it can so easily and unapologetically take over our lives. I'm not sure if I myself buy into this claimed allegorical poetry. I tend to think that most of the time, meat is just meat, but if you want to make things more than they are regarding horror, be my guest. The movie's soundtrack also adds to the terror. The score, composed by Tyler Bates, is intense and unsettling. The music builds and swells during the most frightening scenes, adding to the tension and making the audience feel like something terrible is about to happen, which is usually true. The use of popular music is also effective, with songs like Johnny Cash's The Man Comes Around and Disturbed's Down with the Sickness, adding to the movie's weird and unforgivingly bleak atmosphere. Mix this all together with some of the most visually and physically frightening zombies ever put to screen, and you really do have one of the scariest zombie flicks ever made, and ever to be made. The question I get asked a lot is, which version of Dawn do you prefer? And my answer is usually this: it depends on the day. I love both films. Both films are epic in scope in their own right, are filled with grand scenes and large-scale action sequences, both have great characters, both have their own unique sense of dread. So yeah, it really does depend on the day. I will say this though, Dawn 2004 is definitely the scarier film. Love you, babe, and I will see you next time. In the 1985 movie Legend, there is a terrifying character known as Meg Mucklebones, who is arguably the scariest witch in film history, at least for me. While many other witches have terrified audiences with their cackling laughter, pointy hats, and broomsticks, such as the most obvious example, the Wicked Witch of the West, Meg Mucklebones stands out for me as a truly unsettling and horrifying creature. One of the big reasons Meg Mucklebones is so scary can be attributed to her physical appearance. With mossy green skin, sharp claws, and long, stringy hair, Meg Mucklebones is truly grotesque. Her eyes are sunken in and almost seem to glow in the dark, giving her an otherworldly appearance and really showcasing her as this repulsive creature that inspires fear in anybody who sees her. While Meg Mucklebones is often referred to as a witch, or more specifically, a swamp witch, by both film historians, fans of the film, and other, there is actually very little evidence to suggest that she is in fact a witch at all. She's never shown casting spells or using any kind of magic that we might typically associate with witches. Instead, she's depicted as a swamp-residing, flesh-consuming monster with some kind of ethereal connection to the natural world. A looming presence that is never really explained whatsoever, at least within the film. This ambiguity about her nature only adds to the fear she inspires, as viewers are left uncertain about what she is capable of and how one could really protect themselves from her, besides tricking her with a mirrored shield and getting lucky with a sword stroke.
What a splendid idea.
I liken Meg Mucklebones to the witch from the Hansel and Gretel fairy tale, more than I would to the spell-casting Wicked Witch of the West, where she's more of a location-based threat, hoping to consume whatever living thing walks through her domain. But in this instance, instead of two children finding the witch's house in the middle of the woods, this swamp witch lives within the blackened bog waters and consumes whoever dares to roam through. To this day, Meg Mucklebones, the Swamp Witch, or Swamp Hag, whatever you want to call her, is a source of genuine fear that stays with me long after her brief appearance within the film. And it is brief, but that lingering sense of dread is ever present thereafter. While other witches may have frightened us in the past, such as the Wicked Witch of the West or the Grand High Witch, Meg Mucklebones takes that fear to a whole new level. The Return of the Living Dead Part 2 is a 1987 horror comedy film that acts as a sequel to the 1985 zombie masterpiece, The Return of the Living Dead, and features a similar premise. A small group of people must fight off a horde of flesh-eating zombies that have risen from the dead after being exposed to a toxic gas known as 2,4,5-trioxin. As with the original Return, the sequel showcases a unique blending of horror and comedy, and while horror comedy is a genre that has existed for many years, The Return of the Living Dead Part 2 creates a colorful balance between genuine scares and laugh-out-loud humor, although comedy is more so at the forefront of this film, which contrasts the first film's focus on horror first and comedy second. With that said, Return of the Living Dead 2's humor is often dark and satirical, and sometimes even slapstick, and provides a refreshing contrast to the original film's relentlessness and intensity. Furthermore, the movie's makeup and gore effects are fantastically impressive, particularly given the film's modest budget. In all honesty, I believe the practical and makeup effects used to bring the zombies to life are some of the best on display within the zombie subgenre itself, with the zombies having a unique look all their own, helping to establish these specific flesh-eating abominations as standout members of the undead all their own. In the same way you can look at the zombie lineup of Return of the Living Dead Part 1 and notice a certain visual identity, you can do the same thing with the zombies of Part 2. Despite being a sequel, The Return of the Living Dead Part 2 stands on its own as a unique and engaging film. It slightly expands on the mythos of the first film, but also manages to subvert expectations and create a new story that stands apart. In many ways, it's an underrated gem that deserves to be recognized as the zombie epic that it is, versus the quote-unquote inferior sequel to the original, which it's become unfortunately labeled as by many genre fans over the last few decades. Harkening back to the previously mentioned comedic aspects of the film, the humor is largely driven by the characters, who are both quirky and memorable. The bumbling grave robbers, for example, provide much of the film's comic relief, as they argue and joke with each other while trying to escape the zombie horde, while at the same time slowly becoming zombies themselves. The dialogue is sharp and witty, and there are several memorable one-liners that have become fan favorites. At the same time, the film doesn't shy away from gore and violence. The zombies are grotesque and terrifying, and there are several scenes of graphic violence that are not played for laughs. The balance between humor and horror is a delicate one, but The Return of the Living Dead Part 2 manages to strike it perfectly, creating a film that is both entertaining and genuinely scary. This contributes to the film's overall effectiveness in several ways. First, it keeps the audience engaged throughout the film, as they are constantly shifting between moments of humor and moments of terror. This helps to prevent the film from becoming too predictable or one-note. Second, the humor provides a release valve for the tension and fear that builds throughout the film. By injecting moments of comedy, the film is able to lighten the mood and provide a brief reprieve from the intensity of its horror elements. Overall, the balance between humor and horror is one of the key strengths of The Return of the Living Dead Part 2, and it's a major reason why the film should be revered as the cult classic it truly is. The film's zombies are brought to life through a combination of makeup, prosthetics, and puppetry, and the result is a convincing and terrifying portrayal of the undead. One of the key strengths of the practical effects in the film is their attention to detail. Each zombie is unique, with its own distinct look and personality, while at the same time keeping within the aforementioned uniform look and style. The makeup and prosthetics are intricately crafted, with attention paid to even the smallest details, such as the texture of the skin or the way the eyes move. The puppetry used in the film is also impressive. The film's most memorable zombie, Tarman, is brought to life through a combination of animatronic puppetry as well as a man in a suit, the same man who played the original Tarman as well, Alan Troutman. The result is a convincing and terrifying creature that is both memorable and frightening. Perhaps not as frightening as the original Tarman, but definitely physically bigger and more physically imposing. There is simply a level of realism and authenticity that is difficult to achieve through other means, and they help to create a memorable and comedically terrifying experience for the viewers. On that note, one of the key differences between the zombies of the first film and this one was that the zombies of Part 2 were shamblers versus the runners they were in the 1985 film. In closing, The Return of the Living Dead Part 2 is an underrated sequel and a must-see for fans of the horror genre because it successfully blends horror and comedy, features impressive practical effects, and has had a lasting impact on subsequent zombie movies and pulp culture. The characters are well-developed and multidimensional. The film's practical effects, particularly those used to bring the zombies to life, are impressive and contribute to the film's overall effectiveness, providing a sense of spooky realism and creepy authenticity. Return of the Living Dead Part 2 is an underrated gem that deserves more recognition, and I am so glad that the masses seem to be slowly but surely coming around to it. The 1985 film Return to Oz was marketed as a family-friendly adventure that would entertain children and adults alike. However, upon its release, many viewers were left with a looming sense of dread and a very palpable feeling of unease. The movie is meant to be viewed as a spiritual sequel to the classic 1939 film The Wizard of Oz, which was a whimsical and cheerful and very loose adaptation of L. Frank Baum's novel. Return to Oz, on the other hand, takes a very dark turn and presents a nightmarish version of Oz that is far from the colorful and magical land that we were familiar with. One of the most frightening aspects of the film is the portrayal of its villains. One of the main antagonists, Princess Mombi, is a malevolent witch who collects the heads of others and wears them as her own, changing them out accordingly depending on her mood. And the scene of her headless form, walking around, searching for a specific head, remains one of the most startling visuals in this supposed children's film to this day. A secondary class of particularly unsettling villains, which add to the film's frightening tone, is a gang of humanoid abominations called the Wheelers, a group of alarmingly strange creatures with wheels where their hands should be and wheels where their feet should be. The scene where they chase Dorothy and her chicken through the ruins of the Emerald City is reminiscent of a chase sequence directly out of an actual horror movie and is sure to give any child nightmares. Another aspect of the film that may be frightening to children are the scenes which take place at the children's institution in the real world of the film, rather than Oz itself. Before her arrival in Oz this time around, Dorothy is sent to an oppressive children's clinic to undergo electroshock therapy after she refuses to stop confiding in her aunt and uncle about her original adventures in Oz, tales which they, of course, do not believe. The institution itself is a grim, weird, dark, and very oppressive place, and the scenes of Dorothy undergoing the electroshock therapy are extremely difficult to watch. While Return to Oz was intended to be a movie for children, its dark and unsettling tone may be too frightening for many young viewers. The portrayal of terrifying villains, the use of special effects, and the depiction of mental illness are just a few of the elements that contribute to the film's frightening atmosphere, let alone the Gnome King, the talking rock monsters, the deadly desert, Jack, the Gump, and so on and so forth. While the movie has gained a cult following over the years, it is important for parents to consider the potential impact it may have on their own children before showing it to them. Unlike the kids of our generation, who are shown this movie with reckless abandon and permanently scarred by the film. But with that said, Return to Oz is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. And yes, I said it. I said it before and I'll say it again. Return to Oz is most definitely a horror movie. So hearkening back to my comment about being permanently scarred by the film, I have to ask my fellow movie watchers of the same age as me, would we have it any other way? Thank you so much for hanging out, and as always, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell to stay informed on all things TobattoVision. And if for some reason you just can't get enough of me and want more, check out my other YouTube channels as well, and feel free to hit me up on social media, where stuff really gets weird. I'll see you next time.